Gene Kelly's voice broke as he whispered the two words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Don't go." But Vivian Leigh was already walking toward the door of his New York apartment, her suitcase in hand, her heart shattered beyond repair. In 30 seconds, she would be gone forever, taking with her the only love Kelly would ever feel that was bigger than his ambition. It was October 23rd, 1951. And the greatest dancer in American cinema was about to learn that some performances can't be choreographed, some rhythms can't be controlled, and some dances end before the music stops. The woman who would leave Gene Kelly's heart in pieces and never look back was about to teach him that choosing fame over love doesn't just cost you a relationship. It cost you your soul. The love affair that destroyed Gene Kelly's capacity for happiness began in the most unlikely place, a rainy Tuesday rehearsal for An American in Paris, where he met the woman who would become both his greatest inspiration and his deepest regret. Vivian Leigh wasn't supposed to be there. She was a British-born choreographer, visiting MGM as a consultant for international dance sequences, someone who understood movement the way poets understand words. At 28, she had already revolutionized ballet in London and was being courted by every major studio in Hollywood. Kelly was married to Betsy Blair, had a successful career, and believed he had his life perfectly arranged according to his own ambitious blueprint. But the moment Vivian walked into the rehearsal studio and began moving to the music he was working with, something fundamental shifted in Kelly's understanding of what partnership could mean. "You are holding back," she said after watching him run through a routine he had been perfecting for weeks. Her accent was crisp, her criticism devastating in its accuracy. "Excuse me, the choreography is technically perfect, but you are not letting the emotion drive the movement. You are thinking instead of feeling." Kelly stared at this woman who had just identified something about his work that no one else had ever noticed, something he hadn't even acknowledged to himself. "Show me what you mean." What happened next would change both their lives forever. Vivian stepped into Kelly's personal space, placed her hands on his shoulders, and began moving with him in a way that transformed his carefully constructed routine into something that felt like conversation, like argument, like prayer. For 4 minutes, Gene Kelly danced with someone who understood not just his technique, but his artistic soul. It was the most intimate experience he had ever had with another performer. And it had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with the recognition that he had been dancing alone his entire career. "That is what I mean," Vivian said when the music ended, stepping away with professional composure while Kelly struggled to catch his breath. "Who are you?" Kelly asked. Not because he didn't know her name, but because he couldn't understand how someone had just shown him things about his own artistry that he had never seen before. "I am someone who is leaving for London next week," Vivian replied, gathering her belongings with the efficiency of someone who never allowed personal feelings to interfere with professional obligations. But as she walked toward the door, Kelly made the decision that would complicate both their lives for the next 18 months. "Wait, I want to work with you." The collaboration that began as artistic partnership became something much more dangerous within 3 weeks. Kelly found reasons to extend Vivian's consulting contract, to create projects that required her expertise, to spend time with someone who challenged his creative assumptions and made him feel like he was discovering dance all over again. Vivian, meanwhile, was falling in love with Kelly's intensity, his dedication, his ability to find beauty and discipline and grace in relentless practice. But she was also falling in love with a married man whose life had no room for the kind of relationship she was beginning to want. "This has to stop," Vivian told Kelly one evening in December, after they had spent 6 hours working on a routine that both of them knew was more about being together than about professional collaboration. "What has to stop?" "You know exactly what I mean. Gene, we are not just working anymore." Kelly looked at this woman who had become essential to his creative process and realized she was right. Somewhere between artistic partnership and personal chemistry, they had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "I can't stop," Kelly admitted. "I don't know how to dance without you anymore." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to anyone, and it was also the beginning of the most complicated 18 months of both their lives. The affair that Kelly never admitted publicly became the secret that defined his understanding of love, desire, and the cost of pursuing something you can't have. Vivian became his creative muse and his emotional torment, the woman who made him feel like the best version of himself and the worst version of himself simultaneously. They met in rehearsal studios after hours, in hotel rooms when Kelly traveled, in brief moments, stolen between his official life as a married Hollywood star and his authentic life as a man who had discovered what it felt like to be completely understood by another person. "I have never felt this way about anyone," Kelly confessed to Vivian during one of their clandestine meetings in early 1952. "Not my wife. Not anyone. You make me feel like I am finally awake." Vivian, who had been fighting her own feelings for months, finally allowed herself to believe that maybe love was more important than practical considerations, that maybe some connections were worth the complications they created. "Jean, I love you too. But I need to know what this means. Where are we going with this?" It was the question Kelly had been dreading, the moment when romantic intensity collided with practical reality. He was married to a woman who had supported his career, had a public image to maintain, and lived in a Hollywood system that destroyed careers over personal scandals. But he was also desperately in love with someone who had shown him aspects of himself he had never known existed. "I don't know," Kelly admitted. "All I know is that I can't imagine my life without you in it." For 6 months, that uncertainty was enough. Kelly and Vivian existed in the space between secret and official, between stolen moments and impossible dreams, between the life Kelly had built and the life he was beginning to want. But Vivian was growing tired of being hidden, of loving someone who couldn't choose her openly, of feeling like she was competing with obligations that would always come first. "I got offered a job in London," she told Kelly in September 1952. "Permanent position, creative control, everything I have ever wanted professionally." Kelly felt panic rise in his throat. "You can't leave. We are just figuring this out." "Jean, we have been figuring this out for 9 months. I am 30 years old. I can't spend my life waiting for you to decide whether you love me more than you love your reputation." The conversation that followed lasted until dawn and ended with Kelly making promises he wasn't sure he could keep, and Vivian agreeing to postpone her departure while he figured out how to choose between the life he had and the love he wanted. For 6 weeks, Kelly wrestled with the impossible mathematics of desire and obligation. He loved Vivian in a way that made everything else feel like performance, but leaving his marriage would destroy his career, his public image, and his relationship with his daughter. "I need more time," Kelly pleaded with Vivian in early October. "Time for what? To find a way to have both me and your perfect life? It doesn't work that way. Jean, love requires choices." That is when Vivian made the decision that would save her dignity and destroy Kelly's heart. She accepted the London position. "I am leaving next week," she announced on October 20th. "I can't keep waiting for you to love me enough to choose me." Kelly stared at the woman who had become essential to his happiness and realized he was about to lose her because he couldn't figure out how to be brave about love, the way he was brave about art. "Vivian, please, don't make me choose like this." "I am not making you choose, June. I am making a choice for myself. I am choosing someone who will love me without conditions, without secrets, without apologies." The final 3 days before Vivian's departure were a blur of desperate conversations, last-minute promises, and the gradual understanding that some love stories don't have happy endings, regardless of how much the people involved want them to. On October 23rd, 1951, Vivian came to Kelly's apartment to say goodbye, not to continue fighting, not to give him another chance to choose her, but to end their relationship with whatever dignity they both had left. "I love you," she said, as she picked up her suitcase. "But I love myself too much to keep loving someone who is ashamed of that love." Kelly watched the woman who had changed his understanding of partnership, creativity, and desire prepare to walk out of his life forever, and finally understood that some performances require more courage than he possessed. "Don't go," he whispered, the words escaping before he could stop them. Vivian paused at the door, her back to him, and Kelly could see her shoulders shaking with the effort of not turning around. "Give me a reason to stay that doesn't require me to keep being your secret." Kelly opened his mouth to speak and realized he had no answer that would satisfy either of them. He couldn't promise to leave his marriage. Couldn't guarantee that choosing her wouldn't destroy everything he had built. Couldn't offer her anything except more of the hidden, complicated love that was breaking both their hearts. Vivian waited 30 seconds for a response that never came. "Goodbye, Jean," she said without turning around. "I hope you find whatever you are looking for." The door closed with a sound that seemed to echo through Kelly's chest, and suddenly he was alone with the silence of someone who had just lost the most important thing in his life, because he couldn't figure out how to hold on to it. Jean Kelly never saw Vivian Leigh again. He learned through mutual friends that she had become one of the most successful choreographers in London, that she had married a British theatre director who adored her publicly and supported her career without reservation. She created beautiful work, lived a full life, and apparently never regretted her decision to choose herself over waiting for Kelly to choose her. Kelly, meanwhile, remained married to Betsy for another 15 years. But those who knew him well noticed that something fundamental had changed after October 1951. His performances became more technically perfect, but somehow less emotionally available. He threw himself into work with an intensity that seemed driven more by avoidance than ambition. Jean was never quite the same after that period. Recalled his longtime friend Frank Sinatra years later. Like something had broken inside him that never quite healed. What had broken was Kelly's capacity to believe that he deserved love, without conditions. That someone could see all his flaws and complications and choose him anyway. Vivian had offered him that kind of love, and he had been too afraid of losing everything else to accept it. The regret consumed Kelly for the rest of his life. Not just the loss of Vivian, but the recognition that he had chosen security over courage, reputation over authenticity, the safe path over the transformative one. In later years, when young performers asked Kelly for advice about balancing career and personal life, he would become uncharacteristically quiet, as if the question touched something too painful to examine directly. "Success is meaningless if you are too afraid to risk it for something that matters more," he would sometimes say, though he never explained what had taught him that lesson. Kelly's marriage to Betsy ended in divorce in 1957. But by then, it was too late to reclaim the love he had been too cowardly to choose 6 years earlier. He married again to Patricia Ward in 1960 and found companionship and stability, but never again experienced the kind of creative and emotional partnership that had terrified and transformed him during those 18 months with Vivian. "I chose fear over love," Kelly admitted to Patricia during one of their most honest conversations years into their marriage. "And I have been paying for that choice ever since." Patricia, who had heard whispers about Vivian but never pressed for details, understood that her husband carried a wound that had shaped him more profoundly than any of his professional achievements. "Do you regret it?" she asked. Kelly considered the question for a long time. "I regret being too afraid to find out what my life could have been if I had been brave enough to choose the person who saw me most clearly." The woman who left Jean Kelly's heart in pieces never knew that her departure had taught him the most important lesson of his life. That some dances require you to risk everything. And if you are not willing to risk everything, you will spend the rest of your life wondering what the music would have sounded like if you had had the courage to follow it wherever it led. Vivian Leigh died in London in 1987. Surrounded by the family she had built with the man brave enough to love her publicly, Kelly learned of her death through a brief mention in a British theatre journal, and spent that entire day alone, listening to the music they had danced to together. 4 decades earlier, he never spoke her name aloud. After that, but those closest to him noticed that he would sometimes stop mid-sentence during conversations about love or regret, as if he were hearing something they couldn't hear, remembering something too private to share. Jean Kelly's heart never recovered from whispering. Don't go to someone who was strong enough to leave anyway. But Vivian Leigh's departure also taught him that love without courage is just another kind of performance, beautiful to watch, but ultimately hollow. The greatest dance of Kelly's life wasn't any routine he performed on screen. It was the one he was too afraid to complete, with the woman who had shown him what it felt like to move in perfect harmony with another soul. And perhaps that was the most honest choreography of all. The recognition that some music plays only once, some partners appear only briefly, and some dances can only be performed by people brave enough to risk everything for the chance to move together in complete trust and understanding. Gene Kelly whispered, "Don't go," because he finally understood what he was about to lose. Vivian Leigh left anyway because she understood what she deserved. In the end, they were both right. And that was the tragedy that neither of them ever recovered from.